The German Shepherd Who Saved the Child from Hell and Changed a Woman's Heart Forever. Some storms you can see coming from miles away, others hit without warning, leaving destruction that reshapes the landscape forever. Sarah Martinez had survived both kinds during her 15 years as a police officer, but nothing had prepared her for the tempest that would arrive on her mountain property in the form of a 7-year-old boy and his scarred guardian angel on 4 legs. She'd retreated to these isolated peaks to escape the ghosts of her failures, the weight of cases she couldn't solve, the memory of her own canine partner who'd died taking a bullet meant for her. But isolation is a luxury that ends the moment you realize someone else needs saving more than you need hiding. When Danny emerged from the woods with Max, a discarded police dog who'd appointed himself protector of a child the system had forgotten, their arrival would force Sarah to confront a truth she'd been running from. Sometimes the most important rescues happen not in the line of duty, but in the quiet moments when love decides to act. The first breath of dawn came cold and sharp, cutting through the mountain air like a blade against skin. Sarah Martinez stood at her kitchen window, weathered hands wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug that had seen too many mornings just like this one. Steam rose from the black coffee within, ghosting against the frost-covered glass as she watched the sun struggle to pierce the gray veil of another solitary day. At 45, Sarah carried her years like stones in her pockets, heavy, familiar burdens that had worn grooves into her soul. Her dark hair, streaked with premature silver, was pulled back in the same practical ponytail she'd worn during her 15 years on the force. But those days felt like a lifetime ago now, buried beneath the weight of what she'd lost and the silence she'd chosen to embrace. The cabin creaked around her, its weathered bones settling into another day. These were the sounds that had become her companions, the groan of old wood, the whisper of wind through the eaves, the distant call of a hawk circling high above the valley. She'd bought this place 3 years ago, after the shooting that had ended her career and shattered something vital inside her chest. The realtor had called it rustic charm. Sarah had called it far enough away. Her left leg ached as she shifted her weight, a daily reminder of the bullet that had torn through muscle and bone, leaving her with a limp that marked time like a metronome. But it wasn't the physical scars that kept her awake at night. It was the empty dog bed by the fireplace, the faded outline where Rex used to sleep. Rex, her canine partner for 8 years, the German Shepherd who had taken the second bullet meant for her, who had died in her arms on that rain-soaked street while sirens wailed in the distance. The bed remained exactly where it had always been, a shrine to loyalty that had cost everything to maintain. Sarah's free hand moved instinctively to her hip, fingers brushing against empty air where her service weapon used to rest. Even now, 3 years later, her body still reached for that familiar weight, still sought the comfort of knowing she could protect and serve. But those days were gone, dissolved in the bureaucratic aftermath of an officer-involved shooting and a dog's heroic death. The silence pressed against her ears, thick and suffocating. It had been her choice, this isolation, this retreat from a world that had taken too much and given too little in return. Out here, there were no case files to review, no victims to interview, no broken children whose stories would follow her home and haunt her dreams. Out here, there was only the mountain, the sky, and the echo of her own footsteps on wooden floors. She took another sip of coffee, bitter and strong, the way Rex used to like the smell of it on her breath when she'd lean down to scratch behind his ears. The memory hit her like it always did, unexpected, sharp, leaving her breathless with the weight of all the mornings they'd shared and all the mornings they never would. Outside, the world was painted in shades of gray and silver, frost turning the grass into a crystalline carpet that sparkled in the weak morning light. It was beautiful in its loneliness, this view that had become both her sanctuary and her prison. But today, something felt different. There was a tension in the air, a heaviness that had nothing to do with the weather and everything to do with the way her instincts were suddenly humming beneath her skin. Sarah set down her mug and pressed her palm against the cold glass, her breath fogging the window. Somewhere out there, beyond the reach of her eyes, something had shifted in the careful balance of her solitary world. Sarah stepped onto the porch, the weathered boards groaning under her weight, as the mountain air hit her face like a slap. The world was still caught in that liminal space between night and day, where shadows held secrets and every sound seemed amplified in the crystalline silence. She pulled her flannel shirt tighter around her shoulders and descended the steps, her boots crunching softly on the frost-covered ground. It was then that she saw them. Footprints, small, delicate impressions in the dew-soaked grass, leading from the tree line toward her broken fence. Sarah's heart stuttered in her chest, her trained eye immediately cataloging the details that others might miss. Child-sized, bare feet. Recent. The dew hadn't had time to settle back into the depressions. Her pulse quickened, muscle memory flooding through her nervous system like electricity. 15 years of police work didn't just disappear because you turned in your badge. Every instinct she'd honed on the streets was suddenly alert, processing information with the systematic precision that had once made her one of the best investigators in the county. The prince was small enough to belong to a child no older than 7 or 8. The stride was uneven, suggesting exhaustion or injury. But it was the companion tracks that made her blood run cold, larger paw prints, deep and wide, running parallel to the human tracks. A big dog, German shepherd-sized. Sarah followed the trail with her eyes, her breath coming in short puffs of vapor as her heart rate climbed. The tracks led from the dense woods that bordered her property, weaving an unsteady path through her yard before disappearing near the old split-rail fence that marked the boundary between her land and the wilderness beyond. Someone had been here, in the dark hours before dawn while she'd been lost in restless sleep. A child and a dog had crossed her property. The thought sent a chill down her spine that had nothing to do with the mountain air. Out here, 20 miles from the nearest town, visitors didn't just happen. People didn't stumble onto her land by accident, especially not children traveling alone in the middle of the night. Her hand moved automatically to her hip, fingers grasping for the weapon that was no longer there. The familiar weight of her Glock was absent, stored away in a locked box in the back of her closet along with her badge and the commendations that no longer meant anything. But her body remembered the protocol, the way her muscles had been trained to respond to potential threats. Sarah crouched beside the clearest set of prints, her knees protesting the movement. The grass was pressed down in a pattern that spoke of exhaustion. The child had stumbled here, perhaps fallen. There were drag marks in the dirt, as if small hands had struggled to push upright again. The dog's prints showed he had stopped too, had waited while his companion regained their footing. The mist was beginning to lift as the sun climbed higher, revealing more details in the gray morning light. Sarah could see where the fence rail had been broken, the wood splintered, as if something heavy had fallen against it. There were more prints there, confused and overlapping, telling a story of desperation and flight. Standing slowly, Sarah scanned the tree line with the methodical attention of someone who had learned to read landscapes for clues. The forest was thick here, old-growth pine and oak that created deep shadows even in daylight. If someone was hiding out there, she wouldn't see them unless they wanted to be seen. But she could feel them. That sixth sense that had kept her alive during her years on the force was singing now, every nerve ending alert to the presence of others. Somewhere in those shadows, she was being watched. The knowledge settled over her like a familiar coat, bringing with it the sharp focus that had once defined her professional life. Sarah Martinez might have turned in her badge, but she was still a cop in the ways that mattered, and every instinct she possessed was telling her that whatever was hiding in those woods needed help more than it needed to be feared. Sarah moved toward the broken fence with careful, deliberate steps, her boots finding purchase on the frost-slick ground. The morning mist clung to the earth like smoke, wrapping around her legs as she approached the tree line. 20 feet from the woods, she stopped and let her gaze sweep the shadows, knowing that patience often revealed what urgency could not. "I know you're there," she said quietly, her voice carrying just far enough to reach the darkness between the trees. "I'm not going to hurt you." For a long moment nothing moved. Then, like a whisper of wind through leaves, Sarah caught the faintest rustle of movement deep in the undergrowth. Her heart clenched as a small face emerged from behind a moss-covered oak, pale as moonlight and marked with the kind of wariness that belonged to wild creatures and broken children. The boy couldn't have been more than 7 years old, maybe 8 at most. His face was gaunt, cheekbones sharp beneath skin that spoke of too many missed meals and too many sleepless nights. Dark hair hung in tangled mats around hollow eyes that held equal measures of defiance and terror, the look of someone who had learned that the world was dangerous and adults were not to be trusted. His clothes hung on his thin frame like cast-offs from a much larger child. A torn flannel shirt that might once have been red, jeans with holes worn through both knees, feet bare and dirty despite the cold morning air. But it wasn't the boy's appearance that stole Sarah's breath away. It was what stood beside him. The German shepherd was magnificent and heartbreaking in equal measure. His coat was a patchwork of scars and mud, the rich black and tan fur matted with burrs and debris from days or weeks in the wilderness. One ear stood upright while the other drooped slightly, giving him an asymmetrical appearance that somehow made him more endearing rather than less. But it was his eyes that told the real story, intelligent, alert, and filled with the kind of protective intensity that Sarah recognized from her years working with canine units. This was no ordinary dog. Every line of his body spoke of professional training, from the way he held himself to the careful positioning that kept the boy shielded while maintaining a clear view of potential threats. His muscles were coiled beneath his fur, ready to spring into action at the first sign of danger. But there was something else in his stance, a weariness that matched the child's, the exhaustion of a guardian who had been protecting his charge for far too long. The boy's fingers were buried deep in the dog's thick fur, knuckles white, with the desperation of someone clinging to the only solid thing in a world gone mad. The dog leaned into the touch, had lived it herself for 8 precious years. This was the connection between partners, between protector and protected, between two souls who had found in each other what the rest of the world had failed to provide. "Hello there," Sarah said softly, lowering herself into a crouch to make herself less threatening. The movement sent a sharp pain through her damaged leg, but she ignored it. "My name is Sarah. What's yours?" The boy pressed closer to the dog, who shifted slightly to better shield his small companion. Neither of them spoke, but Sarah could see the war playing out behind those young eyes, the desperate need for help, battling against the hard-learned lesson that help often came with a price too high to pay. "That's a beautiful dog you have there," Sarah continued, her voice taking on the calm, steady tone she had once used to talk down armed suspects and comfort frightened victims. "He looks like he's been taking real good care of you." Something flickered in the boy's expression at her words. Surprise, perhaps, that she had acknowledged the dog's role as protector, rather than threat. The German shepherd's tail gave the barest hint of a wag, as if he too recognized something familiar in Sarah's bearing. The three of them remained frozen in their triangle of tension and possibility, each waiting for the others to make the first move. Sarah could see the exhaustion weighing on both child and dog, could read the signs of hunger and exposure that spoke of too many nights spent sleeping rough. But she also saw the fierce loyalty that bound them together, the unbreakable trust that had carried them this far. In that moment, looking at the boy's haunted eyes and the dog's protective stance, Sarah saw herself as she had been 3 years ago, broken, alone, and desperately in need of something to heal the wounds that had driven her into exile. "You both look like you could use some breakfast," she said finally, the words coming from some deep place inside her that she had thought was lost forever. "What do you say we get you warmed up and fed? No questions, no pressure, just food and a safe place to rest." The boy's grip on the dog's fur tightened, but for the first time since he had emerged from the shadows, Sarah saw something other than fear in those dark eyes. She saw hope, fragile as spun glass, but real enough to build upon. And in that crystalline moment, as the morning sun finally broke through the mist to paint the world in shades of gold and possibility, Sarah Martinez felt the first crack in the walls she had built around her heart. The invitation hung in the crisp morning air between them. Like a bridge neither was sure they dared to cross. Sarah remained crouched in the frost-covered grass, her weathered hand an illusion that shattered without warning. "There's no rush," Sarah said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "We can stay out here as long as you need." The German shepherd's ears swiveled toward her voice, analyzing not just her words, but the tone beneath them. Sarah could see him processing information with the methodical precision of professional training, cataloging her posture, her breathing, the way her hands remained open and visible. This was a dog who had worked with law enforcement, she was certain now. Every line of his body spoke of discipline and intelligence, of a mind trained to assess threats and protect his charges. The boy's fingers worked deeper into the dog's thick fur, and Sarah noticed how the animal leaned into the touch, offering his solid warmth as comfort. There was something achingly familiar about their connection, the way they communicated without words through pressure and proximity. It reminded her of the bond she had shared with Rex, that wordless understanding that transcended species and touched something primal in the human heart. A gust of wind swept down from the mountains, carrying with it the promise of winter's bite. The boy shivered, his thin shoulders hunching against the cold, and Sarah saw his resolve waver. Need was warring with caution, survival instinct battling against hard-learned lessons about the dangers that adults could pose. "I have coffee on the stove," Sarah offered, rising slowly to her feet, careful to keep her movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Hot chocolate, too, if you'd prefer. And I think there's some leftover cornbread from yesterday." The word food seemed to ripple through the boy like electricity. His eyes widened slightly, and Sarah caught the involuntary way his free hand moved to press against his stomach. When had he last eaten? When had either of them had a proper meal? The dog made the decision for both of them. With a soft huffing sound that was almost like a sigh, he took a careful step forward, his intelligent eyes never leaving Sarah's face. The boy followed, his trust placed entirely in his four-legged guardian's judgment. They moved across the yard in a slow procession, Sarah leading while maintaining a respectful distance. The boy walked with the jerky, uncertain gait of someone who had learned to be ready to run at any moment, while the dog maintained his protective position at the child's side. Every few steps, the animal would pause to scan their surroundings, his training evident in the way he cleared each potential blind spot before allowing them to continue. At the porch steps, the boy hesitated again. The cabin loomed before them, its weathered wood and stone foundation speaking of permanence and shelter, but also of enclosure and potential trap. Sarah could practically feel the fear radiating from his small frame as he stared at the open doorway. "Would you like to leave the door open?" Sarah asked, understanding instinctively what was causing his hesitation. "Sometimes it helps to know you can see the way out." The boy nodded quickly, gratitude flashing across his features. It was such a small thing, but Sarah remembered from her police work how important it was to give victims some sense of control, some way to feel less trapped by circumstance. The warmth hit them like a physical embrace as they stepped across the threshold. The cabin exhaled the rich scents of coffee and wood smoke, of lavender sachets, and the lingering aroma of last night's dinner. It was the smell of home, of safety, of a place where someone cared enough to create comfort in the small details. The boy's eyes went wide as he took in his surroundings. The stone fireplace with its gentle flames, the worn but comfortable furniture, the kitchen with its promise of food and warmth. The dog's posture relaxed incrementally, though his eyes continued their systematic sweep of the interior, mapping exits and assessing potential threats with professional thoroughness. Sarah moved to close the door behind them, then caught herself. Instead, she left it standing slightly ajar, just enough to maintain the illusion of freedom while still providing shelter from the mountain cold. "Welcome," she said simply, and meant it more than she had meant anything in years. Sarah moved through her kitchen with the practiced efficiency of someone who had learned to find comfort in routine. She pulled a cast-iron skillet from its hook, set water to boil for hot chocolate, and began slicing thick pieces of cornbread with movements that were deliberately slow and visible. Every action was performed with the understanding that she was being watched, evaluated, judged by two sets of eyes that had learned to read danger in the smallest gestures. "Sit wherever you're comfortable," she said without turning around, giving them space to orient themselves without the pressure of her direct attention. From the corner of her eye, she watched as the boy chose a spot near the hearth, close enough to feel the fire's warmth, but positioned so he could see both the door and Sarah's movements in the kitchen. The dog settled beside him with fluid grace, but Sarah noticed how his body remained coiled, ready to spring into action at the first sign of threat. His positioning was textbook, between his charge and any potential danger, with clear sightlines to all entrances. Whoever had trained this animal had done exceptional work. As Sarah cracked eggs into a bowl, she let her trained observer's eye catalog the details that spoke to their condition. The boy's clothes were dirty but not torn beyond repair, suggesting a relatively recent departure from wherever they had come from. His hair was tangled but not matted, his fingernails dirty but not broken. The signs pointed to days on the road, not weeks or months, but it was the other details that made her chest tighten, the manner in which his eyes tracked her every movement, calculating distances and angles like someone who had learned to anticipate violence. The unconscious way he kept one arm curved protectively around his torso, as if shielding old hurts from fresh assault. The dog showed his own signs of hardship. Burrs caught in his coat, mud caked between his toes, the lean look of an animal who had been sharing meager rations with his companion. But beneath the dirt and exhaustion, Sarah could see the magnificent animal he was meant to be. His coat, where it wasn't matted, showed the rich coloring of quality breeding. His bone structure spoke of strength and intelligence, of genetics carefully selected for working ability. "How do you like your eggs?" Sarah asked, her voice gentle as she reached for the butter. The boy didn't answer, but she saw him glance toward the dog as if seeking guidance. The communication between them was subtle but unmistakable, a language of glances and tiny gestures that spoke of deep trust and mutual dependence. "Scrambled is always safe," Sarah decided aloud, adding butter to the warming pan. The sizzle filled the kitchen with a homey sound that seemed to ease some of the tension from the boy's shoulders. She worked in comfortable silence, letting the familiar rhythms of cooking create a sense of normalcy. The hot chocolate steamed in its mug, rich and sweet, with a dollop of real whipped cream on top. The eggs fluffed golden in the pan, and she added a generous helping to a plate, alongside the thick-cut cornbread and a pat of honey butter. When she turned to present the meal, she found the boy's eyes locked on the plate with an intensity that spoke of genuine hunger. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard, and Sarah felt her heart clench at the visible effort it took for him to maintain his cautious composure in the face of such obvious need. "Here you go," she said, setting the plate on the hearthstones within easy reach. She placed the mug of hot chocolate beside it and stepped back, giving him space to approach the food without feeling cornered. The boy looked up at her for a moment, and Sarah caught a glimpse of something raw and vulnerable in his expression before he ducked his head and reached for the fork. His first bite was tentative, as if he couldn't quite believe the food was real and meant for him. The second was larger, and by the third, he was eating with the single-minded focus of someone who had learned not to take sustenance for granted. The dog watched his young companion eat with patient attention, and Sarah noticed how the boy unconsciously saved small pieces of egg and bread to slip to his four-legged guardian. The sharing was automatic, instinctive, a testament to the bond that had sustained them both through whatever trials had brought them to her door. As Sarah prepared a bowl of water and some leftover chicken for the dog, she felt something loosening in her chest. The simple of providing comfort and sustenance was awakening parts of herself that she had thought lost forever. For 3 years she had lived in careful isolation, protecting herself from the pain of caring too much. But watching these two wounded souls find safety in her home was reminding her of who she used to be. Not just a cop, but someone who had chosen that profession because she believed in protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The afternoon light slanted through the cabin's windows, painting golden rectangles across the worn wooden floors as an unexpected peace settled over the small space. The boy had finished eating, and now sat with his back against the stone hearth, one hand buried in the dog's thick fur, while the other clutched the empty mug that had held hot chocolate. The German shepherd lay stretched beside him, his large head resting on crossed paws, though his ears remained alert to every sound. Sarah settled into her grandfather's old rocking chair, the familiar creak of the joints, a comforting counterpoint to the gentle snap and hiss of the fire. She had positioned herself across the room, close enough to be present, but far enough away to avoid triggering the wariness she could still see flickering behind the boy's dark eyes. From this vantage point, she could observe the intricate dance of communication between child and dog. A gentle touch to the animal's ear would cause his tail to thump once against the floor, reassurance given and received. When a log shifted in the fireplace with a sharp crack, the boy's shoulders tensed, and immediately the dog's head lifted, eyes scanning for threats, until his companion's breathing steadied again. It was a language Sarah recognized with painful clarity. She had shared that same wordless understanding with Rex, had known by the set of his ears when he'd caught a scent, by the tension in his hindquarters when he was preparing to spring into action. That bond had been forged through countless hours of training and years of shared purpose. But more than that, it had been built on absolute trust and mutual devotion. Watching the boy and his protector now, Sarah felt the familiar ache of loss sharp beneath her ribs. Rex had been gone 3 years, but the grief still caught her at unexpected moments, when she woke in the morning and instinctively looked for his dark form by the fireplace, when she heard the distant bark of a dog and her heart leaped with momentary hope. "He knows you're thinking about someone," the boy said suddenly, his voice barely above a whisper. It was the first complete sentence he had spoken, and the words seemed to surprise him as much as they did Sarah. "I'm sorry." Sarah leaned forward slightly, afraid she had misheard. The boy's cheeks flushed pink, but he gestured toward the dog with a small tilt of his chin. "Max. He knows when people are sad about other dogs. He gets this look, label of companion or protector." Sarah felt something warm unfurl in her chest at this small offering of trust. "Max is a good name," she said carefully. "It suits him. He looks like he's been a very good boy." The hint of a smile ghosted across the child's features. "He saved me," he said simply, as if this explained everything that needed explaining. "I can see that," Sarah replied, and she meant it. The dog's protective positioning, his constant vigilance, the way he had evaluated her as a potential threat before allowing his charge to accept help. These were the actions of a guardian who took his responsibilities seriously. "I had a partner once," Sarah found herself saying, the words emerging without conscious decision. "A German shepherd named Rex. He was my best friend." The boy's eyes widened with interest, and Max's ears pricked forward, as if he recognized something familiar in her tone. "What happened to him?" The question was asked with the careful curiosity of someone who already suspected the answer might be painful. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring into the dancing flames. As memories she usually kept carefully locked away rose to the surface. "He protected me," she said finally, "just like Max protects you. Sometimes that's what good dogs do. They put themselves between us and the things that want to hurt us." The boy's arm tightened around Max's neck, and the big dog leaned into the embrace, offering his solid warmth as comfort. "I'm sorry," the child whispered, and Sarah heard in those two words a depth of understanding that no 7-year-old should possess. "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "What's your name, sweetheart?" For a moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. The boy looked down at Max, seemed to have some kind of silent conversation with the animal, then lifted his eyes to meet hers. "Danny," he said, and then after a pause, "My name is Danny." "It's very nice to meet you, Danny," Sarah said formally, as if they were being introduced at a garden party rather than in the aftermath of whatever tragedy had brought them together. "And you too, Max." Max's tail thumped against the floor. Once, twice, and Sarah could have sworn she saw something like approval in his intelligent brown eyes. As the afternoon wore on and the fire burned lower in the grate, the three of them settled into a comfortable quiet. Danny's eyelids grew heavy, his head nodding as exhaustion finally began to claim him. Max remained alert, but relaxed, his watchful presence a constant source of security for his young charge. Been failed by the adults meant to protect him. And this magnificent animal, who had stepped into that role with unwavering dedication. Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 long years. Hope. For the first time since Rex's death, since the shooting that had ended her career and shattered her faith in her ability to save anyone, Sarah dared to believe that maybe, possibly, she might have something valuable to offer after all. Outside, the mountain wind whispered through the pines. But inside the cabin, 3 broken souls had found the beginning of something that might, with care and time, become whole again. The second morning dawned with a softer light. as if the mountain itself was conspiring to create a gentler world for the healing to begin. Danny sat at Sarah's kitchen table, a plate of scrambled eggs and toast before him, eating with less desperation than the day before, but still with the careful attention of someone who had learned not to take meals for granted. Max lay beneath the table, his large head resting on Danny's bare feet, providing warmth and comfort in the simple contact. Sarah moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, refilling Danny's glass of orange juice and checking the coffee pot. But her trained eye was cataloging the small changes in the boy's demeanor. His shoulders weren't quite as rigid this morning, and he had actually looked up and offered her a shy nod when she'd wished him good morning. Progress, she told herself, even if it was measured in millimeters rather than miles. "I like your house," Danny said suddenly, his voice still quiet but less hesitant. "It smells good, like how I thought houses were supposed to smell." The innocent comment hit Sarah like a physical blow, revealing layers of meaning that made her chest tighten with protective fury. What kind of home had this child come from, where the simple comfort of a house that smelled like coffee and wood smoke was remarkable rather than expected? "Thank you," she said carefully, settling into the chair across from him. "I'm glad you feel comfortable here." Danny nodded, then took another bite of eggs. For a moment, Sarah thought the conversation was over, but then he set down his fork and looked at her with those too old eyes. "The bad place didn't smell good," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It smelled like angry and scared," and he trailed off, his small hands beginning to tremble slightly. Sarah felt her professional training kick in, the same calm focus that had helped her interview countless victims during her years on the force. "You don't have to talk about the bad place if you don't want to," she said gently. Solid presence as an anchor. "I was hungry there," Danny continued, his voice gaining a little strength from Max's support. "Daddy said hungry was supposed to teach me to be good. But I tried so hard to be good, and I was still hungry." His small hand moved unconsciously to his ribs, and Sarah caught a glimpse of a fading bruise on his wrist before he pulled his sleeve down to cover it. Sarah's jaw clenched, but she kept her expression neutral and supportive. "Hunger isn't a punishment," she said firmly. "Food is something every child deserves to have, just like love and safety." "Max found me when I was the hungriest I'd ever been," Danny said, his fingers tangling in the dog's thick fur. "I was hiding under the bridge by the park because Daddy was really angry and I was scared to go home. Max was there too, and he was skinny like me, and we shared the sandwich someone had thrown away." Max pressed closer to Danny's legs, his intelligent eyes reflecting the pain in the boy's voice. Sarah could see the dog's muscles tensing, as if he were preparing to defend against threats that existed now only in memory. "That's when Max decided to be my protector," Danny continued, a note of wonder creeping into his voice. "He didn't even know me, but he stayed with me under that bridge all night. And when some older boys came and tried to take my shoes, Max growled and they went away." Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. This child needed her strength, not her tears. "Max sounds like a very special dog," she said. "He taught me things," Danny said, his voice growing stronger as he talked about his four-legged friend. "Like how to find clean water and safe places to sleep. And he always gave me the biggest piece of whatever food we found, even when he was hungry too." The unconscious way Danny's free hand moved to cover what Sarah now recognized as healing bruises spoke volumes about the violence he had endured But it wasn't just the physical scars that worried her. It was the careful way he spoke, choosing his words like someone who had learned that the wrong phrase could trigger explosive anger. "Danny," Sarah said carefully, "I want you to know that what happened to you at the bad place, that wasn't your fault. Sometimes adults do terrible things, and it's never because children deserve it or cause it. Never." Danny looked at her with such profound gratitude that Sarah felt her heart crack open. "Max told me that too," he whispered. "Not with words, but I could tell that's what he thought." In that moment, Sarah made a decision that would change all their lives. She reached across the table and gently covered Danny's small hand with her own, careful not to startle him. "I was a police officer for 15 years, she said quietly. "I specialized in helping children who you need to be." The relief that flooded Danny's features was so profound that Sarah had to look away for a moment to compose herself. When she looked back, she saw something she hadn't seen before in those dark eyes, the first fragile bloom of hope. Later that morning, as Danny dozed by the fireplace, with Max stretched protectively beside him, Sarah found herself studying the magnificent animal with professional interest. Now that she knew more of their story, she could see details that had escaped her notice before. The precise way Max positioned himself to monitor all entrances, the methodical sweep of his gaze as he catalogued potential threats, the disciplined patience with which he maintained his watch. "You're not just any dog, are you, boy?" Sarah murmured, crouching down to Max's level. The German shepherd's ears pricked forward at her quiet tone, and she could see intelligence flickering in his dark eyes. "You've had training, professional training." As if summoned by her words, Danny stirred and opened his eyes. "Max used to be a police dog," he said matter-of-factly, "before they threw him away." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "Threw him away?" Danny sat up, his small hand automatically moving to rest on Max's flank. "That's what Max told me. Not with words, but I could feel how sad he was about it. He showed me his old collar once. It had numbers on it and everything." The pieces began falling into place in Sarah's mind with sickening clarity. A retired K-9 officer discarded when age or injury had ended his usefulness. It was a problem she knew all too well from her years on the force. Departments that treated their four-legged officers as equipment rather than partners, disposing of them when they were no longer cost-effective to maintain. He was living in the old industrial district, Danny continued, his voice taking on the storytelling cadence of a child recounting a favorite tale. All alone in this empty warehouse, and he was so skinny you could see his ribs. I think he'd been there for a long time, just waiting for someone to remember him. Sarah's throat tightened as she imagined the proud, intelligent animal wasting away in abandonment, clinging to the hope that his handlers would return for him. It was a betrayal that struck particularly close to home, reminding her of her own sense of abandonment when the department had pushed her toward early retirement after the shooting. "I found him when I was running away the first time," Danny said, his fingers working gently through Max's fur. "Daddy had been drinking and Mommy was crying, and I got scared and ran to the park. But it was getting dark and cold, and I didn't know where to go." Max's tail thumped once against the eyes, grew distant with memory. Max was lying on this pile of old newspapers, and he was shaking, not from cold, but from being sad and lonely. Sarah found herself leaning forward, caught up in the boy's narrative despite the pain it evoked. "I only had half a peanut butter sandwich in my pocket, but I gave it to him, and you know what? He ate half of it, and then pushed the rest back to me with his nose, like he knew I was hungry too. Danny's face lit up with wonder at the memory. That's when I knew he was special. That's when we became partners. The word partners hit Sarah like a lightning bolt. That was exactly what they were. Not pet and owner, but true partners in the deepest sense of the word. Two souls who had found in each other what the world had failed to provide. We took care of each other after that, Danny continued. Max would find food. He was really good at knowing which garbage cans had safe stuff and which ones didn't. And I would share my blanket with him at night and tell him stories so he wouldn't be so sad about being forgotten. Sarah looked at Max with new respect and understanding. The dog's protective instincts, his professional bearing, his unwavering dedication to Danny. These weren't just the actions of a loyal pet. They were the responses of a trained officer who had found a new mission, a new purpose in protecting this vulnerable child. Both of you were let down by the systems that were supposed to protect you, Sarah said quietly, the words heavy with recognition and shared pain. Danny nodded solemnly. But we found each other, and now we found you. Sarah felt something shift deep in her chest. A settling sensation, like puzzle pieces finally clicking into place. She reached out slowly, giving Max time to assess her intentions, and gently stroked his grizzled muzzle. "Welcome home," she said, addressing both boy and dog, both of you, for as long as you want to stay. Max's tail wagged with more enthusiasm than she had yet seen, and Danny's smile was like sunshine breaking through storm clouds. In that moment, Sarah Martinez officially stopped being a woman living alone and became the foundation of a family bound not by blood, but by the deeper ties of choice, protection, and love. The next few days unfolded with a gentle rhythm that Sarah had almost forgotten was possible. Danny began to emerge from his shell, like a flower slowly opening to sunlight, revealing glimpses of the bright, curious boy who existed beneath the layers of trauma and wariness. He helped with simple chores around the cabin, gathering kindling for the fire, setting the table for meals, feeding Max from the bag of dog food Sarah had purchased during a quick trip to town. It was during these quiet domestic moments that Sarah glimpsed the healing that was taking place. Dan had tossed in the air, miscalculated, and ended up with the morsel balanced comically on top of his head. The sound of genuine joy bubbling up from the boy's throat made Sarah's eyes water with gratitude. Max, too, was showing signs of transformation. His vigilance remained constant, but there was a looseness in his posture now that spoke of growing security. His tail wagged more frequently, and Sarah had caught him several times engaged in gentle play with Danny, a luxury neither of them had been able to afford during their time on the streets. For Sarah, the changes were perhaps the most profound of all. The cabin no longer felt like a tomb for her grief, but like a home filled with purpose and life. She found herself humming while she cooked, planning meals around Danny's preferences, picking up extra toys and books during her supply runs to town. The empty dog bed by the fireplace no longer mocked her with its vacancy. Max had claimed it as his own, filling the space that Rex had left behind, without diminishing the memory of her beloved partner. But it was on the fourth evening, as they sat around the kitchen table, playing a simple card game that Danny had taught her, that the outside world intruded on their carefully constructed sanctuary. The radio, which Sarah kept tuned to the local news station for weather reports, crackled to life with the evening broadcast. Danny was giggling at Max's apparent fascination with the playing cards when the announcer's voice cut through their happiness like a blade. Police are asking for the public's help in locating 7-year-old Daniel Cooper, who has been missing from his home for over a week. The boy was last seen wearing a red flannel shirt and blue jeans. Daniel's parents describe him as troubled and prone to running away, but they emphasize their deep concern for his safety. The cards scattered across the table as Danny's hands began to shake. Max was on his feet instantly, pressing close to his boy's side as the color drained from the child's face. Sarah reached over and switched off the radio, but the damage was done. "They're looking for me," Danny whispered, his voice hollow with terror. "They're going to make me go back to the bad place." Sarah's heart clenched as she watched all the progress of the past few days crumble in the face of this new threat. Danny was already withdrawing, his body language shifting back into the defensive posture she had first encountered by the broken fence. "Hey," she said softly, moving slowly around the table to kneel beside his chair. "Look at me, Danny." When he finally lifted his eyes to hers, she saw not just fear, but a devastating sense of inevitability, as if he had always known this moment of safety was too good to last. "Nobody is going to make you go anywhere you don't want to go," Sarah said firmly. "Not while I have anything to say about it." But even as she spoke the words, Sarah felt a chill of foreboding settle in her chest. The outside world was closing in on their sanctuary, and she had no idea how long she could keep the wolves at bay. In the distance, barely audible above the mountain wind, came the sound of a vehicle making its way up the winding road that led to her cabin. Max's ears pricked forward, and a low growl rumbled in his chest as his training kicked in, identifying the approach of potential threats. Their time of peace was ending, and the real battle for Danny's future was about to begin. The morning sun was just beginning to burn off the mountain mist when Sarah heard the rumble of an unfamiliar engine making its way up her gravel drive. Max's head shot up from where he'd been dozing by the fireplace, his ears rigid with attention as a low growl vibrated in his chest. Danny, who had been quietly sketching at the kitchen table with colored pencils Sarah had bought him, went rigid with terror. "It's okay," Sarah said quickly, moving to the window to peer through the curtains. A battered pickup truck was pulling into her yard, its engine coughing and sputtering like a chain smoker on a cold morning. Behind the wheel sat Tom Wilson, a man Sarah recognized from her infrequent trips to town, the type who always seemed to know everyone's business better than they knew it themselves. "Danny, take Max and go to the back bedroom," Sarah instructed, her voice calm but firm. "Close the door and stay quiet until I come get you." The boy needed no further encouragement. He grabbed Max's collar and practically ran toward the back of the cabin, the dog matching his pace with protective alertness. Sarah waited until she heard the bedroom door click shut before stepping onto the porch, positioning herself between Tom and her home like a human barricade. Tom Wilson emerged from his truck with the self-important swagger of a man who believed his nosiness was a public service. He was in his 50s, with a beer gut straining against a flannel shirt and the kind of thin mustache that suggested he'd peaked in high school and never quite gotten over it. His small, dark eyes swept over Sarah's property with calculating interest. "Morning, Sarah," he called out, his tone friendly, but with an undercurrent that made her skin crawl. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Tom," Sarah replied evenly, not moving from her position on the porch. "What brings you all the way out here?" "Oh, just being neighborly," Tom said, though they lived nearly 10 miles apart and had never exchanged more than polite nods in town. "Heard you might have some visitors lately. Thought I'd check in, make sure everything's all right." Sarah felt her jaw tighten. "Interrogate suspects." Tom's smile widened, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Now, Sarah, we're all just looking out for each other here. Heard there might be a child involved. You know how it is. We all got a responsibility to make sure kids are safe and in the right hands." The implied threat was clear, and Sarah felt her protective instincts flare like a lit match. "Any child on my property is perfectly safe, Tom, safer than they've ever been." "I'm sure you think so," Tom said, his tone patronizing in a way that made Sarah's fingers itch for the service weapon she no longer carried. "But you know, there's procedures for these things, official channels. Wouldn't want you getting in any trouble over a misunderstanding." Through the window behind her, Sarah could hear Max's low, continuous growl, a sound that suggested the dog was reading the situation as clearly as she was. Tom's presence was setting off every alarm bell in the German Shepherd's professional training, and Sarah trusted that instinct completely. "Let me be very clear, Tom," Sarah said, stepping down from the porch so they were on eye level. Her police training had taught her that physical positioning could be as important as words in establishing dominance. "This is private property. Any business I have here is exactly that. My business. If you have concerns about anything happening on my land, you're welcome to contact the proper authorities. But you are not welcome to harass me or anyone under my protection." Tom's face flushed red, and Sarah could see she'd struck a nerve. "Under your protection?" he sneered. "Who do you think you are, some kind of vigilante? You're not a cop anymore, Sarah, haven't been for years." "No," Sarah agreed, her voice deadly quiet. "I'm not a cop anymore, which means I'm not bound by the same rules about how I deal with people who threaten my family." The word family hung in the air between them like a gauntlet thrown down. Tom's eyes narrowed as he processed the implications, and Sarah could practically see the wheels turning in his small-minded brain. "This isn't over," he said, finally backing toward his truck with the air of a man who'd lost the first round, but wasn't ready to concede the fight. "Yes, it is," Sarah replied. "Next time you want to discuss my business, you can do it through official channels. From a distance, off my property." She remained on her porch, arms crossed and posture radiating barely controlled hostility, until Tom's truck disappeared down the mountain road. Only then did she allow herself to exhale, her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline surge that always followed confrontations. The bedroom door opened cautiously, and Danny's pale face peered out. "Is he gone?" "He's gone," Sarah confirmed. But even as she said it, she knew Tom Wilson's visit was just the beginning of their troubles. That evening, Sarah made the mistake of turning on the local news forecast. Storm clouds had been building over the mountains all afternoon, but instead found herself staring at a story that made her blood run cold. Tonight at 6, we continue our coverage of missing 7-year-old Daniel Cooper, the anchor intoned with practiced sympathy. Daniel's parents, Mark and Jennifer Cooper, joined us in the studio today to make a personal plea for their son's safe return. The screen filled with the faces of a man and woman in their 30s, both perfectly composed despite their supposed anguish. Mark Cooper was clean-shaven and wearing a pressed shirt, while Jennifer Cooper had the kind of careful makeup and styled hair that suggested they'd prepared extensively for this appearance. Sarah felt Danny go rigid beside her at the kitchen table, his fork clattering against his plate as all the color drained from his face. Max immediately moved to his side, pressing his solid bulk against the boy's legs in silent support. "Daniel is a troubled child," Jennifer Cooper was saying, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue that didn't seem to be collecting any actual tears. "He's run away before when he didn't get his way. We just want him to know that we love him and we forgive him for any worry he's caused." "Forgive him," Sarah muttered, her professional experience immediately recognizing the manipulation tactics at work. These people were already setting up their narrative, casting Danny as the problem child who had brought this situation on himself. Mark Cooper leaned forward earnestly. "Danny has some behavioral issues," he said, his voice heavy with fake concern. "We've been working with counselors trying to get him the help he needs. We're worried that whoever has him might not understand how to handle his episodes." Sarah watched Danny's face crumple as his parents painted him as disturbed and difficult, every word designed to undermine his credibility and justify whatever treatment had driven him to flee in the first place. This was psychological warfare at its most insidious, and it was being broadcast to thousands of viewers who would now see Danny as a troubled runaway rather than a victim in need of protection. "Turn it off," Danny whispered, his voice breaking. "Please, turn it off." But before Sarah could reach for the remote, Jennifer Cooper delivered the killing blow. "We know Danny can be challenging," she said with a martyred sigh. "He tells stories sometimes, makes up elaborate tales to get attention. We just hope that if anyone has seen him, they'll remember," Sarah said gently, turning to find the boy curled in on himself, tears streaming down his cheeks. "They made me sound crazy," he sobbed, "like everything that happened was my fault, like I wanted to leave." Sarah moved to kneel beside his chair, careful not to crowd him, but close enough to offer comfort. "I know exactly what they just did," she said firmly. "It's called victim blaming, and it's what abusers do to protect themselves. But I want you to listen to me very carefully, Danny. I believe you, everything you've told me, every single word. I believe you." Danny looked up at her with eyes that held a universe of pain. "But what if other people don't? What if everyone thinks I'm a liar?" "Then we'll show them the truth," Sarah said, gently pushing up Danny's sleeve to reveal the fading bruises on his arm. "These don't lie, sweetheart. Your body tells the real story, and there are people trained to read it." Max whined softly and rested his head on Danny's lap, offering his own form of comfort. The dog's presence seemed to anchor the boy, reminding him that he wasn't alone in this fight. "I'm scared," Danny admitted, his voice small and broken. "I know you are," Sarah said, her own voice thick with emotion, "but here's what I promise you. No one is going back to the bad place. Not while I'm breathing. Those people on TV, they don't get to hurt you anymore. I won't let them." As she held Danny while he cried, Sarah felt a familiar fire igniting in her chest, the same righteous fury that had driven her to become a police officer in the first place. She might not carry a badge anymore, but she was still a protector at heart. And this child, this brave, broken little boy who had survived so much, was now under her protection. The Coopers had just declared war. They had no idea what they were up against. Sarah woke before dawn the next morning with the unshakable feeling that time was running out. She'd spent half the night lying awake, her mind racing through legal strategies and worst-case scenarios, while Max maintained his vigil by Danny's bed. The dog's increased alertness told her everything she needed to know. Danger was approaching, and they all could sense it. By the time the sun crested the mountains, Sarah was already on the phone with Janet Morrison, a family law attorney she'd worked with during her police career. Janet had specialized in child protection cases, and if anyone could help them navigate the legal maze ahead, it would be her. "Sarah, I'm going to be straight with you," Janet said after listening to the situation. "If this boy's parents have already gone to the media claiming he's a runaway with behavioral problems, they're setting up a narrative that will be hard to counter. You need documentation, medical records, photographs, witness statements, everything you can get." Sarah glanced toward the kitchen where Danny was helping prepare breakfast, his small hands careful as he buttered toast under Max's watchful supervision. "What about my word as a former officer? It'll help, but it won't be enough on its own. The system is designed to reunite children with their biological parents whenever possible. You'll need ironclad evidence of abuse to prevent that from happening." After ending the call, Sarah spent the morning methodically documenting Danny's condition. She photographed the fading bruises on his arms and ribs, carefully noting their various stages of healing. She recorded him talking about his experiences, his voice growing stronger as he recounted the truth that his parents had tried to discredit on television. "Tell me about the night you decided to leave," Sarah prompted gently, the camera capturing Danny's earnest face as he sat with Max beside him. "Daddy came home really drunk," Danny said, his fingers working through Max's fur for comfort. "He was yelling at Mommy about money, and then he started yelling at me about leaving my bike in the driveway. I said I was sorry, but he grabbed my arm really hard and shook me. That's when this happened." He pointed to a yellowing bruise on his shoulder. Sarah's heart clenched, but she kept her voice professional. "What happened next?" "He pushed me into my room and said I couldn't come out until I learned to be grateful for everything he did for me. But I wasn't ungrateful. I just forgot to put my bike away because I was hungry and wanted to see if there was any dinner left." The innocent logic of a 7-year-old trying to make sense of adult cruelty was heartbreaking, but Sarah knew this testimony could be crucial in court. It was just after noon when Max suddenly went rigid, his ears pricked forward as he stared toward the front of the property. The low growl that rumbled in his chest was different from his usual alert sound. This was the warning of a professional who had identified a genuine threat. Sarah moved to the window and felt her stomach drop. 2 official vehicles were making their way up her drive, a county sheriff's cruiser and a white sedan with government plates. Tom Wilson's threat had been carried out with depressing efficiency. "Danny, remember what we practiced," Sarah said, her voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding her system. "You stay close to Max, you tell the truth, and you remember that I'm not going to let anyone take you anywhere you don't want to go." The boy nodded, his face pale but determined. Max positioned himself protectively in front of both of them, his training evident in every line of his alert body. As the vehicles came to a stop in her yard, Sarah felt the familiar calm that had always descended on her before major confrontations during her police career. This was what she had been preparing for, and she was ready. Deputy she recognized from her days on the force, and a woman in a business suit who could only be from Child Protective Services. Tom Wilson's pickup truck pulled up behind them, and Sarah felt a surge of disgust at his satisfied smirk. "Here they come," she murmured to Danny and Max. "Remember, we're a family now, and families protect each other." Max's answering bark was sharp and defiant, echoing Sarah's own determination. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The sound of footsteps on her porch marked the end of their peaceful sanctuary and the beginning of the fight of their lives. The knock on Sarah's door was authoritative and measured, the sound of people accustomed to being obeyed without question. Sarah took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and opened the door to face the machinery of bureaucracy that had come to tear her fragile family apart. Sheriff Miguel Martinez stood on her porch, his uniform pressed, and his expression carefully neutral. Sarah had worked with him years ago during her time on the force, and she could see the conflict in his dark eyes, duty warring with personal respect. Beside him stood a woman in her 40s, wearing a charcoal business suit, and carrying a leather briefcase that screamed government efficiency. Her steel gray hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her pale blue eyes held the cold professionalism of someone who had learned to view human suffering as merely another case file to be processed. "Sarah," Sheriff Martinez said with a slight nod of recognition, "this is Agent Linda Roberts from Child Protective Services. We need to speak with you about Daniel Cooper." "Agent Roberts," Sarah said, deliberately not inviting them inside. "Sheriff Martinez, I assume you have a warrant." Agent Roberts stepped forward, pulling a folder from her briefcase with practiced efficiency. "We have a court order for the immediate return of Daniel Cooper to his legal guardians," she said, her voice clipped and businesslike. "The child has been reported missing for over a week, and his parents are understandably concerned for his welfare." Sarah's jaw tightened as she scanned the official documents. The language was all there, legal jargon designed to give the appearance of due process while steamrolling over any inconvenient complexities. "His parents," Sarah said, her voice dripping with contempt. "You mean the people who drove a 7-year-old child to flee into the wilderness rather than stay in their care?" "Ma'am, we understand your concerns," Sheriff Martinez said, his tone more conciliatory than his companion's. "But the law is clear. Biological parents have rights, and we have an obligation to reunite families whenever possible, even when those families are the source of the trauma." Sarah shot back, her years of police training lending authority to her words. "Miguel, you know as well as I do that reunification isn't always in the child's best interests." Agent Roberts' expression hardened. "Ms. Martinez, while we appreciate your investment in this case, you have no legal standing here. Daniel Cooper is a minor child who belongs with his legal guardians. Any interference with that process could result in serious legal consequences for you." From inside the cabin came the sound of Danny's sharp intake of breath, followed by a low, continuous growl from Max. Sarah could feel the terror radiating from the boy even through the closed door, and her protective instincts flared like wildfire. "Danny?" Sarah called over her shoulder, her voice gentle despite the tension crackling in the air. "It's okay, sweetheart. Come here for a minute." The door behind her opened slowly, and Danny emerged with Max pressed tightly against his side. The boy's face was ghostly pale, his dark eyes wide with the kind of primal fear that no child should ever have to experience. When he saw the uniformed sheriff, he let out a small whimper and grabbed onto Max's collar with both hands. "No," Danny whispered, his voice barely audible. "Please don't make me go back, please." Agent Roberts' professional mask slipped slightly as she took in the child's obvious terror, but she quickly reassembled her composure. "Daniel, my name is Agent Roberts. I'm here to help you get back to your mommy and daddy. They're very worried about you." "They hurt me," Danny said, his voice stronger now but trembling with emotion. "I don't want to go back to the bad place." Max positioned himself more directly between Danny and the officials, his hackles raised and his body coiled with tension. The German shepherd's professional training was evident in his stance. He had identified these people as threats to his charge and was prepared to act accordingly. Sheriff Martinez held up his hands in a peaceful gesture. "Easy there, boy, we're not here to hurt anyone." But Max's growl only intensified, and Sarah could see the calculations running through his intelligent eyes. This was a dog who had been trained to distinguish between legitimate authority and genuine threats, and right now his every instinct was screaming danger. "You need to understand something," Sarah said, her voice carrying the authority she had once wielded as a sworn officer. "This child came to me battered, terrified, and half-starved. He's been systematically abused by the people you want to return him to, and I will not stand by and watch him be fed back into that machine." Agent Roberts straightened, her bureaucratic armor fully in place. "Those are serious allegations, Miss Martinez. Do you have documented proof of abuse?" I have a traumatized child and a trained eye, Sarah replied coldly. I also have 15 years of experience investigating cases exactly like this one. Had. Agent Roberts corrected with a slight smile. Dismissal was calculated and cruel, designed to strip Sarah of the professional credibility that might have given her words legal weight. But Sarah had faced down armed suspects and hostile interrogations. She wasn't about to be intimidated by a bureaucrat with a clipboard. My badge might be retired, Sarah said, stepping closer to Agent Roberts, until they were nearly nose to nose, but my oath to protect and serve isn't. This child is under my protection, and he's not going anywhere until I'm satisfied he'll be safe. The tension on the porch was thick enough to cut with a knife. 3 adults locked in a battle of wills while a terrified child clung to his canine protector. Sheriff Martinez looked increasingly uncomfortable with the situation, his personal respect for Sarah clashing with his professional obligations. Sarah, he said quietly, you know I don't want to make this harder than it has to be, but I have a job to do. So do I, Miguel, Sarah replied, her eyes never leaving Agent Roberts' face. And right now, my job is protecting that little boy from the people who hurt him. Agent Roberts was reaching for her phone, presumably to call for backup, when Danny stepped forward with a courage that broke Sarah's heart. The 7-year-old's hands were shaking, but his voice was steady as he addressed the officials who had come to drag him back to his nightmare. You want to see proof? Danny said, his small fingers moving to the hem of his shirt. I'll show you proof. Sarah felt her breath catch as Danny lifted his shirt, revealing the map of healing bruises that covered his thin torso. The injuries were in various stages of recovery, some faded to yellow-green, others still dark purple and angry. But it was the pattern that told the real story. Handprint-shaped marks on his upper arms, linear bruises across his back that could only have come from a belt or switch, and the telltale finger-shaped marks around his throat that spoke of hands that had squeezed too hard in anger. Sheriff Martinez sucked in a sharp breath, his professional composure cracking as he took in the evidence of systematic abuse. Agent Roberts's clipboard lowered slowly, her bureaucratic mask slipping as the reality of Danny's condition registered. Jesus Christ, Sheriff Martinez whispered, then caught himself. Sorry, I mean, Danny, who did this to you? My daddy, Danny said simply, as if the answer should have been obvious. When he gets drunk and mad, he hurts me. And Mommy, she just watches and tells me I should try harder to be good. Max whined softly and pressed closer to Danny's legs, offering silent support as the boy bravely exposed the truth that his parents had tried so hard to discredit on television. The worst time was when I accidentally broke his beer bottle against the wall. I couldn't breathe, and I thought I was going to die. That's when Max found us. Sarah watched as understanding dawned in the official's eyes. Max was there? Agent Roberts asked, her professional training finally kicking in as she processed the implications. Danny nodded, one hand tangled in the German Shepherd's thick fur. Max broke down the back door and growled at Daddy. Daddy was so scared he dropped me and ran away. Max stayed with me all night, and when I felt strong enough to walk, we left together. The silence that followed was deafening. Sheriff Martinez was staring at the bruises with the horrified fascination of someone seeing the true face of child abuse for the first time, while Agent Roberts was rapidly reassessing her entire approach to the case. The dog, Max, he's the one who rescued you from an active assault? Agent Roberts asked, her voice softer now, more human. He saved my life, Danny said, with absolute conviction. And then he taught me how to survive on the streets until we found Sarah. She's been taking care of both of us, making sure we're safe and fed and warm. She's the first grown-up who ever made me feel like I mattered. Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. This wasn't the time for emotion. This was the time for professional advocacy. "Agent Roberts," Sarah said, her voice carrying 15 years of experience in child protection cases. "I've documented these injuries, recorded Danny's testimony, and gathered evidence of the systematic abuse he's endured. As a former law enforcement officer with specialized training in domestic violence cases, I can tell you unequivocally that returning this child to his biological parents would be tantamount to signing his death warrant." Agent Roberts was quiet for a long moment, her trained eye taking in details she had initially overlooked. Danny's obvious attachment to both Sarah and Max, the way he positioned himself to stay close to his protectors, the absence of fear in his demeanor when interacting with Sarah versus the terror that had gripped him at the mention of his parents. "This changes things," she admitted finally, her bureaucratic armor showing its first real cracks. "These injuries, they're consistent with systematic abuse. The pattern suggests escalating violence over an extended period." "Which is exactly what I've been trying to tell you," Sarah said, allowing a note of steel to enter her voice. "The Coopers went on television and painted Danny as a troubled child who makes up stories. But bruises don't lie, and neither do the protection protocols of a trained canine officer." She gestured toward Max, who had maintained his protective stance throughout the entire encounter. "That dog has been professionally trained to identify throat, clearly struggling with the conflict between his official duties and his growing understanding of the situation." "Sarah, what you're showing us, it's compelling evidence. But the legal system doesn't move quickly, and we still have a court order." "Then we make the system move," Sarah replied, with a determination that had once made her one of the most effective officers in the county. "Because I'll be damned if I let that child spend even one more night in hell while bureaucrats shuffle paperwork." The next 2 hours became a blur of phone calls, legal maneuvering, and bureaucratic warfare that tested every skill Sarah had developed during her years in law enforcement. Agent Roberts, to her surprising credit, had become an ally rather than an adversary once she'd seen the evidence of Danny's abuse. But even with her support, the machinery of the system ground forward with inexorable slowness. "Judge Harrison is in court until 4, Janet Morrison's voice crackled through Sarah's phone. "I've filed for an emergency hearing, but the earliest we can get on his docket is tomorrow morning." Sarah felt her stomach clench. Tomorrow morning meant Danny would have to spend another night in terror, wondering if each sound might herald the arrival of officials, come to drag him back to his tormentors. "There has to be something else we can do," Sarah said, pacing the length of her kitchen while Danny sat at the table with Max pressed close to his side. "Some emergency provision, some way to buy more time." "I'm working every angle I can," Janet assured her. "But Sarah, you need to understand. The system is designed to err on the side of parental rights. Even with the evidence you've gathered, it's going to be an uphill battle." Sheriff Martinez had remained on the property, officially to ensure compliance with the court order. But Sarah suspected his real motivation was to serve as a buffer between Danny and any overzealous CPS officials who might arrive. Agent Roberts had returned to town to file her own reports, her professional assessment now weighing heavily in Danny's favor. The phone rang again, and Sarah grabbed it before the first ring finished. "Hello? Ms. Martinez, this is Dr. Patricia Henley from County General. I understand you have a child who may need medical documentation of abuse." Sarah felt a surge of hope. Dr. Henley was a pediatrician she'd worked with during several child protection cases, a woman whose testimony carried significant weight in family court. "Dr. Henley, yes. Can you come to us? The child he's very afraid of being taken anywhere right now. People who want to make sure you're safe, and we're all working together to protect you." Max's tail thumped once against the floor, as if he understood and approved of the battle being waged on his boy's behalf. The afternoon brought an unexpected development when Sarah's phone began ringing with calls from community members who had heard about the situation. Old Mrs. Peterson from the general store called to offer character testimony. The pastor from the local church volunteered to speak on Sarah's behalf. Even Jake Williams, the mechanic who serviced her truck, called to say he'd testify about the changes he'd seen in her since Danny and Max had arrived. "Word gets around fast in a small town," Sheriff Martinez observed, watching Sarah field another supportive call. "Folks here know you, Sarah. They remember the kind of cop you were, the kind of person you are." But even with this groundswell of community support, the legal realities remained daunting. The court order was still valid, the Coopers still had parental rights, and the system's bias toward biological families remained an enormous hurdle to overcome. As the sun began to set over the mountains, casting long shadows across the cabin, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. Tomorrow would bring the hearing that would determine Danny's future, and despite all their preparation, all their evidence, all their determination, the outcome remained uncertain. But as she looked at Danny and Max curled together by the fireplace, the boy reading quietly while the dog maintained his vigilant watch, Sarah felt her resolve harden like steel. She had failed to save Rex 3 years ago, had let the system grind her down and force her into bitter retirement. This time would be different. This time she would not fail. The battle for Danny's soul was far from over. But Sarah Martinez had never surrendered a fight in her life. She wasn't about to start now. The morning after the official's visit dawned with an ominous heaviness that seemed to press down on the mountain like a physical weight. Sarah stood at her kitchen window, coffee mug forgotten in her hands, as she watched dark clouds rolling in from the west, massive, bruised thunderheads that blotted out the sun and cast the world in shades of gray and shadow. The barometric pressure was dropping so rapidly she could feel it in her bones, in the old injury to her leg that always ached before storms. But it wasn't just the weather that had her on edge. The approaching tempest in the sky seemed to mirror the emotional and legal storm that was bearing down on their fragile sanctuary. Tomorrow's hearing loomed like a sword hanging over their heads, and despite all their preparation, all their evidence, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were still fighting an uphill battle against a system designed to favor biological parents over the best interests of the child. Sarah, small and uncertain as he appeared in the doorway, Max pressed close to his side. The boy's face was pale, dark circles under his eyes, testament to a sleepless night, filled with worry and fear. "Is it going to be a bad storm?" Sarah turned from the window, forcing a smile she didn't feel. "Looks like it might be, sweetheart, but we're safe and warm in here. Storms always pass eventually." She was speaking about more than just the weather, and from the look in Danny's eyes, he understood the deeper meaning. The boy had withdrawn into himself over the past day, clinging to Max with an desperation that broke Sarah's heart. The brief period of healing and growth they'd experienced was being eroded by the stress of the impending legal battle. And Sarah could see Danny retreating back into the defensive shell that had protected him during the worst of his abuse. Max, too, was showing signs of increasing agitation. The German shepherd's ears were constantly alert, his head turning at every sound, the creak of the cabin settling, the whistle of wind through the eaves, the distant rumble of thunder, still miles away. His professional training was telling him that danger was approaching, and his protective instincts were ramping up accordingly. "We should probably get some supplies together," Sarah said, forcing herself to focus on practical matters. Candles, flashlights, extra water. Mountain storms can knock out power for days sometimes. As she moved through the cabin, gathering emergency supplies, Sarah found herself making other preparations as well. Photocopying important documents, ensuring her phone was fully charged, making sure the evidence she'd gathered for tomorrow's hearing was protected from potential water damage. She was preparing for more than just a weather emergency. She was fortifying their position for whatever battles lay ahead. The wind picked up as the afternoon wore on, sending pine boughs scratching against the cabin's windows like skeletal fingers. Danny had positioned himself on the couch by the fireplace, Max's large body providing a living barrier between him and the rest of the world. The boy barely spoke, just sat clutching the German shepherd's fur while his eyes tracked every shadow, every movement beyond the glass. Sarah tried to maintain normalcy, preparing an early dinner and attempting conversation, but she could feel the tension in the air thickening like the approaching storm clouds. When she went to check her phone around 4 o'clock, she discovered that the cell signal had disappeared, the mountains and the storm conspiring to cut them off from the outside world. "Phone's out," she announced, trying to keep her voice casual, but inside she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. They were isolated now, cut off from Janet Morrison and the other allies who were working to protect Danny. If something went wrong, if the Coopers or overzealous CPS officials decided to make a move during the storm, she would be on her own. The first drops of rain began to fall just as darkness settled over the mountains, fat droplets that splattered against the windows with increasing intensity. Lightning flickered in the distance, followed by the low roll of thunder that seemed to vibrate through the cabin's bones. Danny flinched at the sound, and Max immediately pressed closer, his warm bulk providing comfort and security. But Sarah could see the fear building in the boy's eyes. Not fear of the storm, but fear of what tomorrow might bring. The weather was simply an external manifestation of the chaos he was feeling inside. The sense that forces beyond his control were gathering to tear apart the only safety he had ever known. "It's going to be okay," Sarah said, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to convince Danny or herself. "Whatever happens, we'll face it together." But as the storm intensified outside, as the wind howled through the trees and the rain began to hammer against the roof, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this night would change everything. The weather, the isolation, the looming court date, it all felt like the universe was conspiring to test the bonds they had forged, to see if their newfound family was strong enough to weather the tempest that was coming. Max's low growl rumbled through the cabin, and Sarah realized the dog was sensing something she couldn't yet perceive. His hackles were raised, his body coiled with tension, as if he could feel the approaching danger in ways that human senses couldn't detect. The storm was coming, in more ways than one, and Sarah Martinez could only hope that when it passed, there would still be something left to salvage from the wreckage. The screaming started just after midnight. Sarah jolted awake in her chair by the dying fire, her heart hammering as Danny's terrified cries echoed through the cabin. She rushed to the couch where he slept, finding him thrashing in Max's protective embrace, caught in the grip of a nightmare so vivid that his body was fighting against invisible hands. "No, please, Daddy, I'll be good," Danny sobbed, his small fist striking out at phantoms only he could see. I'm sorry, please don't hurt me anymore." Max was already working his canine magic, his large body providing a warm, solid anchor as he gently licked the tears from Danny's face. But the boy's eyes remained closed, lost in a dreamscape where his father's drunken rage and his mother's cold indifference played out in endless, horrifying loops. "Danny, sweetheart, wake up!" Sarah said softly, careful not to touch him without permission. She had learned during her police work that trauma victims could be triggered by unexpected contact, especially when caught between sleep and waking. "You're safe. You're here with me and Max. No one can hurt you." Danny's eyes snapped open, wild and unfocused, searching for threats that existed only in his subconscious. When his gaze finally found Sarah's face in the dim firelight, she saw the exact moment recognition dawned. The subtle relaxation of his shoulders, the way his breathing began to slow from panicked gasps to something more manageable. "Sarah?" His voice was hoarse from screaming, barely audible above the storm that raged outside the cabin walls. "I'm here," she assured him, settling onto the edge of the couch. "You had a nightmare, but it's over now. You're safe." Danny struggled to sit up, Max adjusting his position to maintain contact without restricting the boy's movement. Outside, lightning illuminated the windows in stark white flashes, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mountain. "I dreamed they came and took me away," Danny whispered, his small hands buried in Max's thick fur. "I dreamed you couldn't stop them, and they dragged me back to the bad place, and Daddy was so angry because I ran away." Sarah felt her heart break at the raw terror in his voice. "That's not going to happen," she said firmly. "I promise you, Danny, I will not let anyone take you back there." "But what if the judge doesn't believe us?" Danny's question was barely audible, but it carried the weight of all his fears. "What if they think Mommy and Daddy are telling the truth about me being bad and making up stories?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. In the flickering firelight, with the storm raging around them and the future uncertain, she found herself sharing truths she had never spoken aloud. "Do you want to know something?" she said, her voice soft but steady. "Before you and Max came to me, I was lost, too. I was hiding up here in these mountains because I was afraid and angry and broken, just like you were when you ran away from the bad place." Danny's eyes widened with interest, his nightmare temporarily forgotten in the face of this revelation. "I was a police officer for 15 years, Sarah continued, and I thought I was pretty good at protecting people. But then something terrible happened, and I couldn't protect the one who mattered most to me, my partner, Rex. He died because of my failure, and I blamed myself so much that I couldn't bear to be around people anymore." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and honest in a way that Sarah hadn't been with another human being in 3 years. "But then you two showed up," she said, reaching out to gently touch Danny's hand. "Two broken souls who needed help, who needed protection. And you know what I realized? Taking care of you, fighting for you, it reminded me who I used to be. It reminded me why I became a cop in the first place." Max's tail thumped softly against the couch cushions, as if he understood the significance of what was being shared in the storm-wrapped darkness. "You saved me, Danny," Sarah said, her voice accident. "That's what families do. They find each other, and they hold on, no matter what storms try to tear them apart." Danny was quiet for a long moment, processing this new understanding of their connection. When he spoke, his voice was stronger than it had been since the official's visit. "So, we're really a family now?" he asked. "Not just until the storm passes or until the court decides what happens to me." "We're a family forever," Sarah said, without hesitation. "No matter what happens tomorrow, no matter what any judge says, you are my son and Max is our dog, and nothing is ever going to change that. I will fight for you with everything I have, and I will never, ever stop fighting." Outside, The wind howled like a living thing, rattling the windows and sending debris crashing against the cabin walls. But inside, in the warm circle of firelight, three souls who had found each other in the darkness, held tight against the storm, drawing strength from the bonds that had made them whole. The power went out just before 2 in the morning, plunging the cabin into darkness, broken only by the dying embers in the fireplace and the occasional flash of lightning that turned the windows into stark, electric rectangles. Sarah moved through the familiar space by memory, lighting candles and oil lamps until the main room was bathed in warm, flickering light that danced across the walls like living things. "It's like camping," Danny said, his earlier terror giving way to a child's natural fascination with the unusual. He was curled against Max on the couch, a blanket wrapped around both of them, watching the candle flames with wide eyes. "Better than camping," Sarah replied, settling into her chair with a cup of tea brewed on the wood stove. "At least we're warm and dry." The isolation was complete now. No phone, no internet, no connection to the outside world, except for the battery-powered radio that crackled with static and occasional weather updates. They were truly on their own, three souls weathering the storm together in their mountain sanctuary. In the candlelit intimacy of the storm-wrapped cabin, conversations flowed with an openness that daylight might have inhibited. Danny, perhaps sensing that this might be their last night together as a family, began to tell his story in full, not just the fragments and hints he had shared before, but the complete narrative of his young life. "Daddy wasn't always mean," he said, his voice soft but steady in the flickering light. "When I was little, really little, he used to read me stories sometimes. But then he started drinking more, and the stories stopped, and the yelling started." Sarah listened without interruption, her trained ear cataloging the progression of abuse that Danny described, the escalation from verbal to physical violence, the way his mother had gradually withdrawn from protecting him, the systematic destruction of a child's sense of safety and self-worth. "The worst part wasn't even the hitting," Danny continued, his fingers working absently through Max's fur. "It was the way they looked at me, like I was this terrible burden they had to carry, like everything bad that happened was my fault, just for existing." Max whined softly and pressed closer to his boy, offering comfort in the only way he knew how. The dog's presence seemed to give Danny strength to continue his story, to speak truths that had been locked away in the darkest corners of his heart. "That's why I knew Max was special from the very beginning," Danny said, his voice growing stronger. "He looked at me like I mattered, like I was worth protecting. Nobody had ever looked at me that way before." It was Sarah's turn to share, and in the storm-wrapped darkness, she found herself opening wounds that had been carefully sealed for 3 years. "Rex was my partner for 8 years, she said, staring into the dancing flames. "German Shepherd, just like Max. He was more than just a working dog. He was my best friend, my confidant, the one being in the world who understood me completely." She paused, gathering the strength to continue a story she had never told in its entirety. "We were responding to a domestic violence call, ironically enough, a case very similar to yours, Danny. A man had been beating his wife and children, and when we arrived, he had a gun. Rex did what he was trained to do. He put himself between me and the weapon. The bullet that killed him was meant for me." Danny's eyes were wide in the candlelight, his young face reflecting the pain he heard in Sarah's voice. "After that, I couldn't do the job anymore," Sarah continued. "Not because I was physically unable, but because I couldn't bear the thought of losing another partner, another friend. So I came up here to hide, to nurse my wounds and my guilt in isolation. But you didn't really lose Rex, Danny said, with the startling wisdom that children sometimes possessed. He's still with you, isn't he? Just like Max will always be with me, no matter what happens. Sarah felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Yes, she whispered, he's still with me. As the storm raged on through the night, they pieced together Max's story as well. A decorated K-9 officer who had served with distinction until a minor injury had made him less valuable to his department. Like so many retired working dogs, he had been discarded when he was no longer cost-effective, left to fend for himself in a world that saw him as obsolete equipment rather than a living being deserving of gratitude and care. "We're all refugees," Sarah said as dawn began to dissipating clouds, painting the storm-washed world in shades of gold and promise. Sarah felt something settle deep in her chest. Whatever the day ahead might bring, whatever challenges they would face in court, they had survived the storm, both the literal tempest that had raged outside and the emotional hurricane that had torn through their hearts. They were no longer three broken individuals seeking shelter from their respective storms. They were a family, forged in adversity and tempered by love, ready to face whatever battles lay ahead. The long night was ending, and with the dawn came the promise that some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. The morning after the storm broke clear and sharp, the mountains washed clean under a sky of crystalline blue. Sarah stepped onto the porch, coffee in hand, and saw a world reshaped. Massive pines lay sprawled across her driveway, roots exposed to the sun. Power lines sagged from broken poles, sparking faintly where they touched wet ground. The small bridge to the main road was half gone, planks scattered downstream. Yet the destruction carried its own strange beauty. The air smelled of pine and wet earth, and everything, from grass blades to distant peaks, glistened in the sun. "Wow," Danny murmured beside her. Max pressed against his side. "It's like a different world." Sarah understood. The storm had stripped away more than trees and wires. It had washed out the fear and hesitation that had kept them from naming what they were to each other. "Different, but not broken," she said, "just rearranged into something better." Cut off from phones and roads, court would not happen today. Instead of anxiety, Danny seemed lighter, buoyed by the truths they'd shared the night before. As they worked through the morning clearing branches, Sarah saw changes in them both. Danny moved with new confidence, peppering her with questions about storms, trees, and wildlife. Max's watchfulness felt different now, less like a lone guardian on high alert, more like a family protector at ease in his place. "3 weeks ago we were strangers," Sarah said, pausing to watch Danny throw sticks for Max. "Now look at us." The isolation was a mixed blessing, shielding them from immediate legal threats, but delaying contact with allies. Still, Sarah's mind had shifted. Whatever hoops the system demanded, they were a family now, and nothing a judge or social worker could say would undo that truth. By midday, sun warmed the yard and steam rose from the damp ground. As they ate lunch on the porch steps, Danny rested a hand on Max's grizzled muzzle. "Max looks different," he said, "like he's not carrying something heavy anymore." Sarah studied the dog and saw it too. The hard, "Really? We can rename him?" They tossed ideas back and forth, dramatic choices from Danny, honorable ones from Sarah, until Danny suddenly grinned. Hero. His name should be Hero. The word hung between them, simple and true. Max lifted his head, eyes flicking between them as if in approval. "Hero," Sarah repeated. "Yes, that's exactly right." It felt like more than renaming. It was a declaration, a recognition of what they'd built together. Hero wasn't an abandoned canine anymore. He was the heart of their family. "Let's make it official," Sarah said. They fetched her old camera and spent the next hour taking portraits, Hero between them on the porch, Danny grinning, Sarah smiling in a way she hadn't in years. "This goes on the mantle," she declared. "Our first family photo." The afternoon drifted into talk of the future, not the court hearing, but the life they wanted after. Danny dreamed of school, friends, learning to ride a bike. Sarah pictured which cabin room would be his, the sound of laughter filling the once quiet home. "When I'm officially your son," Danny asked, "and Hero's officially ours, what happens then?" "Then we live," Sarah said. "We live the life we choose, the life we've earned by fighting for each other." Hero barked once, sharp and joyful. Around them storm debris no longer looked like ruin, but renewal. By evening, reality edged back in. The storm had bought them time, but once roads and lines reopened, the legal machine would resume. Tuning her battery-powered radio, Sarah caught news reports. Devastation across the region, court delays likely. Then came a local segment that made her blood boil. Danny's parents playing the cameras. "We just want our little boy back," Jennifer Cooper's voice crackled through static. "We know he can be difficult, but we love him and forgive him for all the worry he's caused. We just pray whoever has him will do the right thing." Sarah clicked the radio off before Danny could hear more. She knew what they were doing, shaping the narrative, painting Danny as a runaway and themselves as victims. That night by the fire, she told him plainly, "When the road's clear, everything will happen fast. Court, social workers, maybe reporters. Are you ready?" Danny nodded, his face steady. "I want to tell my story. I want people to know the truth." The pride she felt was fierce. 3 weeks ago, he'd been silent and fearful. Now he was ready to face his abusers head-on. For the next 2 days, as the outside world slowly reconnected, Sarah prepared. She organized photos of Danny's injuries, recordings of his testimony, proof of his progress in her care. They rehearsed their days. The storm had tested them, but it had also given them something rare: the clarity to see who they were and what they were willing to fight for. And Sarah knew, as surely as she knew the mountains around them, that the fight ahead would be worth every ounce of strength she had left. Hero played an unexpected role in their preparations. The dog's protective instincts and professional training made him an ideal companion for Danny during these practice sessions, providing emotional support while also demonstrating the depth of their bond to anyone who might question it. "Watch this," Sarah said during one of their preparation sessions, as Danny sat at the kitchen table pretending to give testimony, while Hero positioned himself protectively at the boy's side. "Any judge or social worker who sees you two together will understand immediately that this isn't just a pet-owner relationship. This is a partnership forged by mutual need and deepened by genuine love." When the phone lines were finally restored on the 3rd day after the storm, Sarah's phone immediately began ringing with calls from their legal team, from concerned community members, and even from a reporter who had somehow obtained her number. The outside world was rushing back in, bringing with it all the complications and pressures they had been temporarily shielded from. But Sarah found that the storm-enforced isolation had given them something invaluable: time to solidify their bonds and clarify their purpose. They were no longer reacting to external pressures. They were proactively shaping their own narrative. "Janet," Sarah said when her lawyer finally got through, "we're ready. Whatever they throw at us, however hard they fight, we're ready." "Sarah, I have to warn you," Janet's voice was tight with concern. "The Coopers have hired a very aggressive attorney, and they're pushing hard for immediate custody transfer. They're claiming that every day Danny spends with you is further trauma that's being inflicted on an already disturbed child." Sarah looked across the room at Danny, who was reading quietly by the fireplace with Hero's head resting on his lap, the picture of a secure, healing child, surrounded by love and safety. "Let them come," she said quietly. "We have something they can never have. We have the truth, and we have each other." As night fell over the storm-washed mountains, Sarah felt the familiar calm that had once preceded major operations during her police career. Tomorrow would bring renewed legal battles, media scrutiny, and the full weight of a system that was often more concerned with bureaucratic convenience than with the welfare of children. But tonight, they were still a family, safe, gray stone, weathered by decades of broken dreams and hard-won victories. Sarah felt Danny's small hand slip into hers as they climbed the wide steps, Hero trotting at his other side. The German shepherd's vest marked him as an emotional support animal, thanks to Dr. Henley's quick work, a lifeline for the boy in what would be the hardest day of his young life. Inside, the air buzzed with the quiet chaos of the legal system, the shuffle of papers, the low murmur of lawyers, the faint tang of industrial cleaner overlaid with human tension. Courtroom 3B was all dark wood and high ceilings, more like an arena than a place for truth. Sarah had testified in court before, but never with her heart this much on the line. Across the aisle sat Mark and Jennifer Cooper, dressed to look like respectable, concerned parents. Mark's navy suit couldn't hide years of self-indulgence, and Jennifer's softened makeup masked the cruelty Sarah knew too well. Between them, their lawyer, Richard Blackwood, radiated slick confidence, a man who made a career twisting truth into whatever his clients paid for. Sarah's own table was smaller but resolute. Attorney Janet Morrison, calm and focused. Dr. Henley, ready with medical proof of abuse. Detective Castellanos, her former colleague, here to testify to her integrity. "Remember," Janet whispered to Danny as they sat, "just tell the truth. That's all we need from you." Hero settled beside the boy, solid and steady, his amber eyes sweeping the room. His presence softened faces in the gallery. People couldn't help but notice the bond between child and dog. When Judge Patricia Harrison entered, her steel-gray hair and steady gaze commanded silence. "This is a custody hearing for Daniel Cooper," she announced. "Our job is to determine what serves the best interests of the child." Blackwood rose first, spinning a tale of heartbroken parents and a troubled boy, manipulated by a woman projecting her own issues. He painted Sarah's past trauma as instability, Danny's fear as misbehavior. Janet's reply was measured and unwavering. She spoke of documented abuse, of a child's transformation under safety and care, and of the healing power of his bond with Hero, a bond rooted in love, not control. The battle lines were drawn. This was no longer about law alone. It was about whether love could outweigh biology. Then came the moment Sarah had feared. "Daniel Cooper, please take the stand." Danny stood, Hero rising with him. The bailiff started to object to the dog, but Judge Harrison cut him off. "The child may have..." Cross-examination was sharp, designed to shake a child's confidence. "Isn't it true you've lied before to get attention?" he pressed. Hero growled low, stepping protectively between Danny and the lawyer. "Objection, counsel is intimidating the witness," Janet shot back. "Sustained," the judge said, adding with a faint smile. "And it seems the dog has strong feelings about tone of voice. Continue, but mind your delivery." Sarah's turn came. She spoke with the steady authority of a former officer, laying out evidence of abuse while making one thing clear. "Danny has thrived not because I indulge him, but because I give him what every child deserves: safety, stability, and unconditional love." Dr. Henley's medical testimony left no doubt. Danny's injuries matched sustained abuse. Castellano spoke to Sarah's character. Community members described the boy's transformation since moving in with her. But nothing cut through like Danny's final words. Turning to the judge, he said, "I know those people are supposed to be my parents, but they hurt me and made me think I was bad just for existing. Sarah and Hero made me feel safe and loved. They're my real family, and I want to stay with them forever." Hero's tail thumped once, the sound warm and sure in the silent room. The judge called a 30-minute recess. Out in the hallway, Sarah knelt beside Danny. "No matter what happens, we're a family," she said. He buried his hand in Hero's fur, the dog's steady breathing grounding them both. When they returned, Judge Harrison's expression gave nothing away. "In my 30 years on the bench, I've learned to ask one question above all. What serves the best interests of the child?" Her gaze met Danny's. "The evidence shows Daniel was subjected to systematic abuse. His testimony is credible, the medical documentation is clear, and the behavior of his support animal corroborates his trauma. In Ms. Martinez's care, he has shown remarkable healing. The bond between this child, Ms. Martinez, and Hero is the stable, nurturing environment he needs." She turned to the Coopers. "This court awards temporary custody of Daniel Cooper to Sarah Martinez, pending adoption proceedings. I am also referring this case to the district attorney for investigation into the abuse allegations." The gallery erupted, gasps, tears, even scattered applause. Danny turned to Sarah, beaming. "We did it," he whispered, hugging her tightly. Danny sat with Hero's massive head resting on his lap, golden afternoon light washing over all three of them. "I can't believe it's real," Danny said for the 4th time, staring out at the mountain road that led home. "I really get to stay forever?" "Forever and always," Sarah answered, her voice thick. "You're my son now. Nothing can change that." The word son settled between them like a blessing. Hero's tail thumped against the seat, as if the German shepherd understood and approved. As the road climbed, Sarah noticed how Hero's posture had shifted. The hypervigilance that had defined him since they'd met was gone. replaced by something that looked a lot like contentment. His mission was complete. When they turned into the driveway, Sarah's breath caught. Cars lined the gravel, and the front yard was full of people, neighbors, friends, the community that had quietly rooted for them all along. Mrs. Peterson stood on the porch with a casserole. Pastor Williams held balloons, and a banner stretched across the porch. "Welcome home, Danny." "They came," Danny whispered, eyes wide. For years, Sarah had kept herself apart, convinced she didn't deserve belonging. But here it was, waiting for her. No perfection required, just people willing to care. The next hours blurred into hugs, congratulations, and enough food to last a month. Danny shone in the attention, while Hero moved through the crowd like a seasoned professional, accepting pets, but never straying far from his boy. After sunset, when the last guests left, Sarah led Danny to the spare room. He gasped. The storage space had been transformed into a child's bedroom. A sturdy bed with a hand-stitched quilt, a desk by the window, shelves ready for books and treasures. "This is mine?" "It's yours," Sarah said. "Your room, your home, your family." He threw his arms around her. "Thank you, Mom. Thank you for saving me." Hero pressed against them, completing the embrace. In that golden moment, they were home. Life after the courtroom settled into rhythms that felt almost ordinary. Homework at the kitchen table, Hero sprawled across their laps during movie night. Danny reading bedtime stories aloud to both of them. School came first. Sarah worried about triggers, but Danny walked into Pine Ridge Elementary with the same courage he'd shown in court. Ms. Rodriguez, his teacher, recognized his empathy, loyalty, and resilience, nurturing them alongside his academic skills. "He's reading at a 4th grade level," she told Sarah, "and every drawing has Hero in it. You can see their bond in every line." Therapy sessions with Dr. Amanda Foster were less fun for Danny, but just a soldier. Sarah enrolled him in obedience classes, not for discipline but for play. Watching him discover fetch, belly rubs, and the joy of sprawling across Danny's bed was as rewarding as seeing Danny rediscover childhood. Sarah, too, found her way back into the community. People sought her advice, asked her help, and she became an informal counselor and mediator, a role she didn't realize she'd missed. The healing showed in Danny's face, filling out with good meals and safety, and in his laughter, now a daily soundtrack. By spring, he'd caught up academically, made friends, starred in the school concert, and convinced his baseball coach to name Hero team mascot. A year later, on the anniversary of the day Danny walked out of the woods, the three of them sat on the porch, watching the sunrise spill gold and pink over the mountains. Danny, now taller and 15 pounds heavier, chatted about friends, summer plans, and becoming a veterinarian to help animals like Hero. The boy who once flinched at every sound now charged into life with joy. Hero dozed at their feet, muzzle graying, still protective but content. Twice a week he visited the school as a therapy dog, helping other children with invisible wounds. "Do you remember what we were like a year ago?" Sarah asked. "Scared," Danny said simply. "All of us. But we found each other, and now we're not scared anymore." That afternoon, they stood again before Judge Harrison, this time for the final adoption hearing. It was a formality, but Sarah's heart still raced. Judge Harrison smiled as she signed the documents. Danny, you are now officially Danny Martinez. Miss Martinez, you are officially his mother, in every legal sense. Danny let out a whoop of joy, Hero's tail wagging so hard he nearly toppled the court reporter's desk. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she hugged her son forever. Their story rippled beyond their small town. Sarah spoke at conferences on trauma recovery and service animals. Their case was cited in legislative debates on child protection reform. Most importantly, other families opened their homes to children in need, inspired by what they'd built. That night, Sarah stood in Danny's doorway, watching him read to Hero about the life cycle of butterflies. The symbolism wasn't lost on her. The boy who had emerged from his cocoon of fear was learning to fly. Their broken pieces had fused into something stronger and more beautiful than before. They were living proof that family can be chosen. Whole town had turned out, faces lit with pride for a story that had changed their community. On stage, Hero, his German shepherd coat freshly groomed, sat with dignified calm. A bronze medal hung at his neck, engraved with a dog and child walking together. At his paws lay a certificate declaring him Pine Ridge's Hero of the Year for saving Danny's life and exposing a child abuse case that had shaken the town into action. From the front row, Sarah watched as Mayor Patricia Kensington stepped to the podium. "Today," the mayor said, "we celebrate courage, loyalty, and love, the kind that can transform lives and heal communities." Since their story broke, media attention had poured in from across the state. Sarah, fiercely protective of Danny, ensured coverage focused on hope rather than trauma. The reports had sparked statewide conversations about child protection, animal welfare, and the healing power of human-animal bonds. When the mayor invited Danny to speak, Sarah's pride was almost overwhelming. The boy, who had once emerged from the woods, frightened and silent, now walked with confidence to the microphone. "Hero saved my life," Danny said. "Not just from the bad people, but from feeling like I was alone, like nobody cared if I lived or died. He showed me I was worth protecting, worth loving. And then he brought me to Sarah, my mom, who taught me what a real family looks like." The crowd was silent, listening to every word. "So this award isn't just for Hero," he finished. "It's for all of us, because we saved each other." When Sarah spoke, she shifted the focus outward. Hero represents thousands of service animals, discarded when they're no longer useful. Danny represents thousands of children suffering in silence, waiting for someone to notice. The rescues that matter most often come from ordinary people who decide someone else's pain matters more than their own comfort. Their message was already making an impact. The county revised child protection protocols. The state considered new laws for retired service animals, and locals volunteered as foster homes. That night, driving home, Hero's medal catching the dashboard light, Danny asked, "Mom, do you think we could help other kids like me?" Sarah smiled. "I think that's exactly what we're supposed to do." The transformation of Sarah's cabin into a refuge began quietly. Word spread among caseworkers about the woman in the mountains who had turned a traumatized boy love, patience, and the security of belonging. That's the bare minimum we owe them. Hero's next chapter was just as remarkable. Under Dr. Foster's guidance, he became a certified therapy dog, specializing in children who had endured trauma. His instinctive sense for when to comfort and when to give space made him an invaluable partner in therapy sessions. He reads children like a book, Dr. Foster said. It's like he's been trained for this all his life. Danny, now 10, began visiting kids in temporary placements, sharing his story and offering hope. I tell them it's not their fault, he explained to Sarah. Some don't believe me, but Hero helps them understand. Their mentoring work led to the cabin's certification as a respite care facility. The spare bedroom became a sanctuary for children in crisis. Their first long-term foster child was Emma, 9 years old, with the same guarded eyes Danny once had. Hero immediately took up watch beside her. She reminds me of me, Danny said. I want to help her feel safe like you and Hero helped me. Foster care brought both challenges and joy. Sarah juggled therapy appointments, explained the bittersweet reality that love was permanent, even if placement wasn't, and watched children find their footing again. Their example inspired others. A network of foster families formed, mentoring newcomers and sharing resources. Sarah's reputation spread, leading to national speaking engagements and policy consultations. But the truest rewards came in letters and photos from children who had once stayed in their home, each one a reminder of the healing they had helped spark. Evenings on the porch swing became their tradition. One night, with Emma asleep after 3 weeks of gentle coaxing, Danny leaned into Sarah. Remember when it was just us three? I remember when it was just me, Sarah said, scratching Hero's ears. I thought my story was over. Turns out it was just beginning. Danny, now 11, was becoming a natural mentor. Emma smiled today, he said proudly, not the polite one, a real smile. Hero was chasing his tail, and she laughed so hard she snorted. Sarah remembered Danny's own milestones. The first real laugh, the first hug, the first time he called her Mom without thinking. Hero's growth was just as profound. The hypervigilant guardian had learned to relax, though his instincts remained sharp for his therapy work. Dr. Foster now believed he could train younger dogs for the same role, the perfect full circle for his journey. As the sky darkened, Sarah felt the peace of a life lived with purpose. She no longer needed a badge to serve. Her work now was daily, personal, and transformative. What will happen to Emma? Danny asked. She'll heal, Sarah said. Maybe with us? Emma rested peacefully in her room, secure for the first time in years. From the day Danny and Hero had walked out of the woods into her life, Sarah had learned the truth. Families can be chosen. Healing is possible. And sometimes the greatest heroes arrive on 4 legs, bringing the children who need saving and the adults who need reminding of what they were meant to do with their lives. The mountain wind whispered through the pines, carrying the promise of tomorrow. And on that porch, 3 souls who had found each other in the dark sat together, complete, whole, and home at last. Sarah, Danny, and Hero's journey reminds us that some of life's most profound healing comes through the love we share with our 4-legged family members. German Shepherds, like Hero, possess an almost mystical ability to sense when we need protection, comfort, or simply a warm presence beside us during life's storms. Their loyalty runs deeper than training. It's written in their very souls. They don't just live alongside us. They weave themselves into the fabric of our hearts, becoming silent guardians of our hopes and healers of our deepest wounds. Every dog has the potential to be someone's hero, just as every person has the capacity to be transformed by a dog's unwavering devotion. The bond between human and canine transcends words, creating a language of trust, protection, and pure love that speaks to something ancient and essential in both our species. If you've been touched by Hero's story and find yourself wanting to deepen the connection with your own German Shepherd companion, you might appreciate the gentle guidance I've discovered that helps unlock the full potential of these remarkable relationships. Not through force or dominance, but through understanding and respect for the incredible intelligence these dogs possess. Sometimes, the most beautiful partnerships begin with simply learning to listen.